Online with Terry Jeffrey, a CNSnews.com production.
Hi, welcome to this edition of Online with Terry Jeffrey. Our guest today is Quentin Wilber, a reporter for the Washington Post and author of Rawhide, Rawhide Down, the near assassination of Ronald Reagan. Del, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Early in your book, you spent some time describing the character of Ronald Reagan, who this man was. Who was Ronald Reagan?
You know, Ronald Reagan, as an author, as you're approaching a book and you want a central character, you cannot get luckier than having a guy like Ronald Reagan. I approach this book, as you probably know and others, I'm a Washington Post reporter. I cover the federal courthouse. My publicist would kill me if she heard me say I'm not a presidential historian, but I'm not, right? I approached it that way. I came at it as a crime story. But I approached Reagan with a bit of trepidation, frankly, because so much has been written about him. He's like an iconic figure in American politics. But I actually came to really admire the guy. I found him to be kind of the quintessential leader. I found that the portrayal of him in the media at the time and even today as someone who just read what was put in front of him like a script was not true. That in fact in my research, the day he shot, the very day he shot, just 70 days in office, he delivers a routine speech to the AFL-CIO, right? Routine speech. He rewrote that speech by hand. Mm-hmm. And so I like, you know, what kind of guy puts that time in on a Saturday to rewrite a routine speech and rewrite the gridiron speech he gave that next day? And, you know, I came to kind of admire him as a person. And, you know, he came from nothing. You know, and I think there's a lot of lessons in Reagan's life story for all of us. Like, for example, you know, we all know I grew up in, you know, rural Illinois, and he had a choice. He could go work in a factory, he could work on a farm. He went to college, right? He goes to college. What does he major in? Not teaching, not education. He majors in economics. Then what does he want? He wants to be in the movies. But he goes to work at a radio station, you know, and that's not easy during the Depression. Then he becomes a movie star. But that's not enough. He becomes the Screen Actors Guild president. That's not enough. He becomes governor. He loses in 1976 to Jerry Ford. But he doesn't quit. He runs again when everyone thought he was too old. And he's sworn in as president as a 69-year-old on January.
And all that stuff wasn't happening by accident to Ronald Reagan. These are goals that he set, that he worked toward consistently with intelligence and focus, correct?
Oh, there's no question. You know, he was, you know, people kind of portray him as kind of bumbling through life in a way, and I don't know where that comes from, because you cannot succeed in what he succeeded at and be like kind of a guy just wandering through life. I mean, you know how hard it is to be a union president? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know a lot of conservatives bash unions all the time, but trust me, you know, I'm a guild member, at the newspaper guild. It is hard work, okay? And he was president of the Screen Actors Guild. It's not easy to be governor of the biggest state in the country. You know, he did a lot as governor.
In your character portrait of Reagan that you start out with the book, you also say something very interesting. In light of so many politicians, we see that flip-flop back and forth, really don't know where they are. Of course, Ronald Reagan had been a Democrat. He became a Republican. But you say in the book that he's someone who had a fully formed political conscience.
There's absolutely no question he had a fully formed political consciousness, none at all. I mean, he came into office knowing what he wanted to do, how he wanted to get there. He was willing to compromise, which, you know, frustrated people on both sides. You know, a lot of conservatives thought he compromised too much. In the Cold War, dealing with Gorbachev, right? He compromised a lot. And, you know, in the battles with the Democrats, you know, he gave away stuff that people thought, oh, you know, you shouldn't. You know, there's that famous quote from him, wouldn't I rather have 70% of what I want than going over the hill with my flag waving?
Right, but he didn't compromise his principles.
No, he did not. He compromised on the edges. You know, I want lower taxes. Now, what can I get to get that goal? I want to win the Cold War. What am I willing to give away to win that goal? You know, and on this day, he shot and survived. It changed him as a person, too. It made him even more focused about what he wanted to achieve in life. And so, you know, but he was really funny. You know, Ronald Reagan's a very spiritual man. You know, he didn't get a lot of credit for that either. Very spiritual man. I'm not going to say religious, because there's still debate about how often he went to church.
Well, in your book, you describe a scene where he and Nancy are walking across Lafayette Square to church.
To church the day before the shooting, you know, and he liked it. He loved church. Now, he didn't get to go as often as he wanted. That's true because of the Secret Service and all these other requirements. But after, you know, he shot, you know, he says, you know, I think God spared me for a purpose. But what I liked about Ronald Reagan was that, you know, today so many people say, God wants me to do this, God wants me to do that, right? He was not presumptuous to even think about what God wanted him to do. He didn't. He said, I believe God wanted me to try to end the threat of nuclear war. That's why I was spared. Well, that, if you really parse what he wrote there in his autobiography and you really examine it, it's really fascinating. He's not saying, he doesn't predispose what God, you know, he's not presuming he knows what God wants from him.
You believe that Ronald Reagan believed he was put on this earth to do in his life what God willed him to do, and he was ready to find that path and do it.
To do the best he could. But he wasn't so presumptuous as to assume, I know what God wants from me. Which is very humble, right, for a guy who's president of the United States.
You know, a related characteristic you mentioned in your book that may be tied to this, you say he was a supremely confident person and a relaxed person. This wasn't a man with a great deal of angst.
No.
He wasn't someone who was worried about what other people thought of him.
No, there's a, you know, that famous plaque on his desk, there's no limit to what a man can achieve if he doesn't care who gets the credit. It's true about Ronald Reagan. I mean, he was really good at, like, people played him as, you know, oh, he's just reading from a script, you know, whatever, and they all lost, okay? Tip O'Neill, Jim Wright, I mean, they all, in these battles with him over policy and everything, they almost always came in second place because he was always underestimated. Like 1966, he ran against Edmund Brown for governor. I mean, the guy ran a campaign ad saying, you know, he's just an actor. Ronald Reagan's just an actor. We know who shot Lincoln, don't we? And he lost by 1 million votes. You know, what I came to conclude was you cannot underestimate Ronald Reagan.
Okay, so this is a man who was elected president in 1980. January 1981, he's inaugurated. 70 days later, it's late March of 1981. I know you have a whole host of characters in your story, but what happened?
All right. On March 30th, 1981 at 2:27 p.m., Reagan had just finished giving a speech to the AFL-CIO at the Washington Hilton Hotel. For those of you who know the Washington, it's a beautiful hotel, it's a big ballroom designed just to court the President of the United States to go there. Special VIP entrance that goes into a holding room that's like the bunker, and this, you know, it's well laid out. But they didn't consult the Secret Service on the driveway, and so the VIP entrance is separate from the T Street entrance, where you pull up through T Street, you go to the VIP entrance, you drop the president off, and normally you just leave the limousine there and pick them up and keep going. Well, the driveway was too narrow and winding to support the 13,000-pound limousine, presidential limousine known as the Beast. And so they had to back it up about 20, 30 feet, and Reagan would have to walk out of this hotel to get there. Now, people are constantly asking me, you know, surprises. Well, that's a surprise. I would have thought that if you're building this big hotel, you would have designed it properly.
Especially right down the street from the White House.
Yes, and the whole purpose of this VIP room was to get the president to go there. Because that, you know, you get a lot more events if you can host the president of the United States.
Right.
Well, another thing is, you know, Reagan on this day, this speech, routine speech, just a crazy routine speech, the AFL-CIO, but it was important enough to him that he rewrote the draft by hand. And the rewrite of that draft that he wrote, the original draft was written by Mari Massing. She's a smart cookie. Mari Massing goes on to marry George Will. She's Mari Will. She's very smart in communications. She knows she can write a great speech. Her speech was good, but Reagan even made it better. And that surprised me because I'm taking the time to do that.
By the way, let me ask you about the sources for this, because you write this narrative, it's very detailed, and you really sort of tick-tock the whole thing out. Here's what's going on. How do you know that Ronald Reagan rewrote that speech by hand? How did you figure that out?
Draft. I went to the Reagan Library and I found the draft. I found his own writing there. And so, you know, I got Mari Massing's draft, and then stapled to it, President's changes. The first whole page is his handwriting, him rewriting everything. And then he goes through it and scratching out stuff, rewriting paragraphs, making it better, cracking better jokes. And so that was, you know, there was a lot of research at the Reagan Library went into this to figure out who Ronald Reagan was.
So this was a Monday when Ronald Reagan was shot?
It was a Monday.
And on that Saturday, he was sitting at the White House?
In his residence writing the speech.
Rewriting the speech to make sure it was just the way he wanted it to be.
Yes, because it was important to him. Because, you know, he was a former AFL-CIO member, because affiliated union with the Screen Actors Guild. But two, he really cared about the way he was portrayed and what he said. He really cared about that stuff. And as president, do we have anything more important than the bully pulpit? No. This was who Ronald Reagan was. So he delivers the speech. And frankly, it wasn't his best speech, okay? I watched it, not the best speech. It was well written, but not well delivered.
Wasn't Ronald Reagan at the Brandenburg Gate?
No, it wasn't. Not tear down this wall. Although in the book, it's really interesting, that tear down the wall, not to digress comment, he echoed it. I tracked down Richard Allen, who went on with Reagan on a trip to Berlin in 1978, and they're sitting at the Berlin Wall in 1978, and Reagan looks at the wall and says, Dick, we have to find a way to knock this thing down.
It's a great story.
8 years later, what does he say? Right, or 10 years later. So 2:27 p.m., March 30th, 1981, Reagan emerges from the VIP entrance of the Washington Hilton Hotel. He's walking towards the presidential limousine, which is about 25 to 30 feet away. Off his left shoulder is Jerry Parr, 50-year-old head of the Secret Service detail. Wasn't even supposed to be there that day. In fact, he had taken a shift from another agent because he wanted to get to know Reagan better. They're walking towards the limousine. 15 feet from the president, behind an unsecured rope line, are reporters waiting to ask questions like Sam Donaldson, who's on the body watch. He's there just in case something bad happens. Then you have a bunch of union guys, some of them joking around going, let's see if we can count his wrinkles. We can get that close. And there's John W. Hinckley Jr. John W. Hinckley Jr. is obsessed with a movie actress who's now at Yale University, Jodie Foster. He had stalked her for quite some time. In fact, he had in his mind that if he shot the President of the United States, killed him, he would gain her affection. So in 1980, in October, he was stalking Jimmy Carter and got within arm's reach, may have even shaken his hand. But he didn't bring his guns with him. He left them at the bus depot. He stalked Reagan in the transition at Blair House. And now he's going through D.C. on his actual way that morning, on his way back to New Haven, Connecticut, where he's going to kill himself, kill her, or kill both of them in an orgy of violence. That was what his goal was that day. But he had seen the president's schedule in the newspaper. And he said, you know what, I'm going to take my gun up to the Hilton and see how close I can get. So there he was at 2:27 p.m. Cloudy, gray day, not the nicest day in Washington. Pulls out his gun and unleashes 6 shots in 1.7 seconds.
Literally standing next to these reporters.
Standing next to reporters, 15 feet from the president. And if you've ever been to a basketball court and shot a free throw, that's 15 feet. That close. 6 shots in 1.7 seconds. 1.7 seconds, by the way, is the time it takes me to say 1.7 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
First shot hits James Brady, the press secretary, in the head. He falls to the ground. The second shot hits D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty in the back. He falls to the ground. The way to Reagan should be clear. But Jerry Parr is already reacting. In about 0.4 of a second, Parr has grabbed the President of the United States and thrust him towards that open limousine door. The third shot goes high. And I'm not surprised that Hinckley missed with that third shot because he took a ton of target practice, but mostly at stationary targets. But Jerry Parr has already gotten the president moving.
So the third shot came after the Secret Service Parr was putting Reagan down.
As he's pushing him into the car.
Mm-hmm.
The third shot goes high over their head,
Could
right
hit
over
Reagan
the president's
if
head.
Mm-hmm.
If Parr had frozen and hesitated, Reagan would have been a sitting duck for that third shot. The fourth shot hits Tim McCarthy in the chest. The Secret Service agent was an extension of the door. Standing there like this, takes a bullet right here, falls to the ground. He's not wearing a bulletproof vest. Talk about courage, you know? I mean, taking a bullet for the President of the United States. He falls to the ground. The fifth shot hits the bulletproof window of the limousine door as they flash behind it. You can actually see them go behind it as the bullet cracks. The sixth shot cracked across the driveway. At the time, no one knew where that sixth shot went. Only later would they realize it ricocheted off the back corner panel of the limousine, slipped through a gap that big between the door and the door frame, and hit Reagan right here in his left armpit. Imagine a guy sliding for home plate. Reagan's diving into that car, and that's how it gets him right here.
Sad close.
And then door slams. Now, we're in Washington. We've seen plenty of presidential motorcades before, right? You've seen them, I've seen them.
Sure.
And when you're stuck in traffic, it takes a long time because they go on and on and on. And I like people to really seriously ponder this scene. The door shuts. It takes off. The driver is praying, don't let me run over Timmy. Don't let me hit Timmy. Tim McCarthy, the agent who fell by the back door, by the back wheel, would have been crushed to death, 13,000 pounds. He misses a police car. They take off down Connecticut Avenue. Jerry Parr looks out the window. He sees 3 bodies on the cement, a bullet mark in the window. He knows there's been an assassination attempt, and that limousine is alone. He left the motorcade behind. They're taking off down Connecticut Avenue with no protection at all. And this is an actual assassination attempt. That's how fast this stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Washington, we can't go anywhere without being stuck in traffic for 30 minutes to wait for the presidential motorcade to get through.
So now it's about 2:30 in the afternoon, you say?
Now about 30 seconds, it's about 15 seconds after 2:27 p.m. as that limousine is taken off down Connecticut Avenue. They're heading down Connecticut Avenue. Jerry Parr checks Reagan out. He rubs his hands up and down there through his hair, props him in the backseat. No blood. Reagan seems okay. Reagan doesn't even know he's been shot yet.
At this point.
At this point. Parr gets on the radio and says, Rawhide is okay. Rawhide is okay. Rawhide is Reagan's Secret Service code name, hence the title of the book, Rawhide Down. Well, they go on. The entire dynamic of the day and perhaps Reagan's presidency changes in the next 15 to 30 seconds. Reagan starts complaining of pain in his chest. He feels like he broke a rib maybe. Then bright frothy blood appears on his lips. And he'd actually taken a paper napkin from the Hilton and dabbed his lips in it, soaked with blood. And Jerry Parr now has the most important decision of Reagan's presidency to make. Do I go to the White House, the most secure place in the known universe, where they have a medical team, or do I go to the hospital? Going to the White House is probably the smart thing to do, right? Because this is like Cold War, right? They're getting reports that the Soviets are about to move on Poland. Maybe this is a decapitation strike. The guy's clearly a good assassin in Parr's mind. He knocked down 3 people, and now the president's hurt. And they were fast. So what does he do? The blood's no problem. It's oxygen, it's bubbly, bright red, meaning from the lungs. He doesn't have any security at the hospital. He makes the decision. Counterintuitive in many ways. I'm going to the hospital. It's 6 blocks from the White House. They go down Connecticut, make a right on Pennsylvania, get there in 3 minutes after the shooting. Reagan insists on walking inside. He walks inside. collapses into the arms of his agents. I interviewed a paramedic who was there, saw it happen. Reagan's eyes rolled in the back of his head. He turned ashen. He collapsed. And the paramedic thought, oh my God, he's Code City, meaning he's going to die. A nurse is going, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die, as they race him over to the gurney. Another nurse is, they've cut off his suit, by the way. And by the way, this suit was given to him by Nancy Reagan. Probably not the smartest thing to do, cut off a suit given to you by Nancy Reagan, but they cut off the suit. She can't get his blood pressure. It's that low. I mean, they are like, they have like she palpitates it with her finger on this arm, feeling. She can't get it. She finally gets it at 60. Shock is 90. His normal blood pressure is 140. He's in deep, deep trouble. They're doing their job though. They're flooding him with fluids, sustaining him. This is, cutting edge trauma care. This place only had become a certified trauma center 2 years before. And they're doing this work that saves his life. They pump him full of fluids, get his blood pressure up. They're doing their jobs. There's a funny scene, this technician doing her job, threads a 3-foot-long IV line from here all the way to Reagan's heart. That's pretty intense, right? She looks up then, and he sees all these guys around, and they're like, wait a minute, what are these guys with suits and earpieces and guns? And she looks down, sees Reagan, oh my God. She can't do her job. She's flummoxed. She goes and gets a smelling salts off the counter, sniffs them back, shocks herself back into her job, and goes back to work. Now they're working. They're trying to save Reagan. They realize he's been shot. They insert a chest tube in his side and drain the blood because they realize the bullet, I wish I'd brought my dime, but if you have a dime, that's what the bullet got flattened into. And imagine getting hit edgewise there by the dime. So it's a tiny little slit.
After it hit the car?
Yeah, it smashes, ricochets, smashes into the shape of a dime and hits him right there. And it hits a rib and tumbles end over end, chewing up arteries and tissue. So that's why he's bleeding so much. He would lose more than half his blood on this day. More than half his blood. He's 70 years old. And half his blood, they make the decision to go to surgery.
Del, this is in the emergency room at George Washington?
In the ER,
Hospital?
the trauma bay.
In the ER at George Washington University
Hospital. Yes,
right.
6 blocks from the White House.
And you interviewed these folks?
Yes,
Who
I interviewed more than 125 people for the book, probably more than 35 people who were medical, treated Reagan.
Who were in that room or
Yes.
somewhere along the way that day.
And I also cobbled together his medical record, so I know when stuff happened.
And you talk about what was going on in the limousine from the hotel over to George Washington University Hospital. Are there recordings of the Secret Service communications and so forth?
There are. Now, I just got those released in March. It took 30 years, but I only been FOIAing it for a year and a half, but I got those released. Freedom of Information Act, filing this stuff. And I got those released, and they're really dramatic because you can tell on those tapes too, they don't know Reagan's hurt until the driver of the limousine gets on, very calmly. We're going to George Washington, fast. And on the tape you can also hear Jerry Parr say, let's hustle. But it's all very calm. And I also benefited because I obtained records from the Secret Service that had never been seen before. Interviews with the agents, days after this happened. Lengthy interviews. So I know what happened to them. So for example, the driver's taken off down Connecticut. Imagine this scene. Driver's taken off down Connecticut Avenue. There's no motorcade. He finally sees the armored follow-up car pull up behind him in his rearview mirror. There are 2 guys hanging onto the running boards, brandishing Uzis. Agents going 65 miles an hour down Connecticut Avenue, holding onto the running boards with Uzis.
Now, so you've heard these tapes, you've interviewed the Secret Service people that were there, you interviewed the people in the hospital, so you've reconstructed this narrative point by point by point from documents, from recordings, and from the actual eyewitnesses who were on the scene.
Yes, and in many ways the documents were very helpful. Like a lot of these doctors and stuff went home and wrote detailed diary entries. The nurses went home and wrote detailed notes because this was an historic day to them. They saved the president's life. In fact, I got very lucky too. This is the perfect time to tell this story. Write this book because, why didn't you do it 5 years after this happened, Del? Well, because I was 9, okay, or 11. I was 11, I was 6. I don't even remember it happening, right? And so I didn't do it then. 20 years from now, these people won't be alive. And the stuff they kept in their attic will be thrown out. And so I'm very lucky I got to combine the record that's never been seen before with all these interviews of people finally feeling comfortable to talk because Reagan had died in 2004. And enough time has passed, but it's ingrained in their mind, and a lot of them took notes. For example, the nurse who first treated Reagan, right there, who was, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die, wrote like 4 pages of notes about what she did with Reagan.
And you had access to these?
Yes, and in fact, and then you always have an interview that is just galvanizing to you as a writer. And for me, that happened when I got David Alberg. They rushed Reagan into surgery, and they insert the chest tube, and they take the chest tube out, and the surgeon's looking for this bullet. Ben Aaron, worried it has slipped into an artery and is going to hit Reagan's brain. He's trying to find the bullet and he can't find it. Meanwhile, 31-year-old surgical intern David Adelberg, just 31, intern, nobody that day.
He just happened to be there.
Happened to be there, gets roped into surgery. May have done a gallbladder that morning, routine day, roped in. 31-year-old David Adelberg reaches his hand inside Reagan's chest and gently cups the president's heart in his hand and nestles it aside to give the other surgeon more room. Think about this for a minute. All right, this is a 31-year-old, nobody in medicine, unscreened, in a room surrounded by a dozen armed Secret Service agents, ready to pounce at the slightest misstep, if they can even divine what that is in medicine. And David Adelberg held the beating life, held the life of the president in his hand. And when he told me that, and that's why this is the perfect time to tell this story, that is such a vivid memory to him. And how galvanizing. He had never concentrated so much in his life as during those moments. And it's seared in his brain. And I would not have been able to tell that story after it happened because they wouldn't have talked. 20 years from now, he may not be around to tell that story.
And that's why they found the bullet?
No. How they found the bullet, so that he's holding his heart, and,
Right.
and Aaron's hunting for this bullet. He wants that bullet really bad.
Right.
For several reasons. One, not good to leave a bullet in the President of the United States politically. Two, he doesn't know if it might migrate somewhere and kill him. They, 80% of shooting victims, they leave the bullet in people because they're benign. They just stay there. A little different case, right? They also know that the bullet is just 1 inch from Reagan's heart. They have to find it because they've done x-rays. He's reaching. Finally, he can't find it because what's happening is the bullet is like slipping between the lung tissue, so he's squeezing for the bullet. He can't get it. He inserts a catheter through the bullet track, through the lung, down to where he thinks it is, and starts pushing around the catheter, and he finally gets it, pulls it out. Gets it with a dramatic flourish, says, "I got it," and drops it in a paper cup. And, that's the moment Reagan saved. And,
Let me ask you, at that moment, this is still not a long time after Hinckley actually fired the shot, right?
No, this is, they pulled the bullet out, I believe, at 5:45 p.m.
So this is
3 hours.
3 hours later. So by this time, the whole country knows that the president has been shot.
Yes.
He's in the hospital.
Yes.
They don't know. People don't know what's going on.
They know
at
he's in
this
surgery at this point because Haig has come out and announced he's in surgery. But that's Alexander Haig, the Secretary of State, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But
Sure.
And so and he lives. And I like to tell people that Reagan's life literally, like what you knew about the shooting, what I didn't knew about the shooting before I researched the book was Reagan shot, he lived, moved on. It's not Kennedy, right? But Reagan's life literally hung in the balance of a split second decision in a mere inch. We came that close to waking up on March 31st, 1981, with George H.W. Bush as President of the United States. And when I say a split second, if Jerry Parr is a split second slower getting him into that car, the trajectory of the bullet hits Reagan in the head. If he hesitates at the scene for a split second, Reagan's a sitting duck. If he goes to the White House and not the hospital, Ronald Reagan is dead. An inch, as I said before, that's how close the bullet came to his heart.
This Secret Service agent, Parr,
Saved Reagan's life twice.
with good instinctive decisions.
And
He was a
honed
professional.
training.
He knew what he was doing, and he did his job.
In fact, what's really interesting in researching the book, there's a rich Secret Service history. You realize the Secret Service didn't really train agents to react without thinking until the mid-1970s? I mean, after Kennedy, after George Wallace is shot in '72, only after that, in the mid-70s, did a bunch of agents out in LA decide they needed to do drills to the point where they could react without thinking. You heard gunshots, you do something. They never really trained agents that way before.
So these men who were protecting Reagan, the natural human instinct is to get out of the way when you hear a
Yep.
gunshot. They did the exact opposite.
They
They got
stayed.
in the way and they moved
Yep.
the president and they saved his life.
Training that only had come around years before.
How long was Reagan in surgery before they finally got him sutured up and back to a room and they?
He was in the operating room for about 3 hours. From about 3 and a half, 3 to 6:45. He gets to the recovery room at 6:45. And what's really interesting is
Was his life out of danger at that point?
mostly out of danger. I think his life was actually mostly out of danger. Well, he's 70 years old, he's in surgery, anything could happen. I'd say once he's in the recovery room, his life is out of danger, mostly. But he still had complications. They were worried about blood gas readings, all this complicated stuff. It wasn't where they wanted it to be.
But at this point, he's under anesthesia.
He's
Yeah.
coming out of groggy. What I also like to tell people, is that, we were talking about Reagan at the beginning, and what did we learn about Reagan on this day? All right. The general public had this sense that Ronald Reagan was kind of an actor. He read from a script. What we learned about on this day about Ronald Reagan, like on the campaign trail, he cracked a lot of jokes. Remember the funny joke, this is the 39th anniversary of my 30th birthday, where his jokes, was it written for him? We don't know. Do we ever really think we know the guy on Pennsylvania Avenue? I don't know. On this day, the script got thrown out the window at 2:27 p.m. Sorry, no more script. And what did we learn about Ronald Reagan? He's shot. He's clearly in pain. He has a chest tube in his side. He's facing death, right? You're 70, you get shot. We all instinctively know that's bad. No matter how, at the time, they portrayed it as not so bad, right? He was going to be okay. He was just shot in the left side, stable. We all know it's not a good thing. He sees his wife, Nancy Reagan, in the ER. And what's the first thing he says? Honey, I forgot to duck. Okay? That's a joke. And he's not crying or whining. If I'd been shot and my wife came in, you'd been shot and your wife comes in, are you going to crack a joke to her? Honestly.
Is this before or after the surgery?
This is before. All right, sorry, I'll rewind. He's
Yeah.
been there about 15 minutes. 20 minutes. They finally let Nancy Reagan come in. And to see him, because she wants to see him desperately. And his first thing to her is to calm her down. We instinctively know that, don't we? Now, would we have done that? I've been shot. I have a big chest to my side. People swirling around. I don't know. You know, the world seems to be upside down. Do I tell my wife a joke? I don't know. I don't know if I'm that brave.
But we know as an historical fact, Ronald Reagan did.
Yes, he did.
Tell us about the other conversations he had in that.
Oh, well, he, as he's being wheeled into surgery, he sees Baker, Meese, and Deaver, his 3 top advisors. And he says, who's minding the store? Right? Because, he's kind of poking fun at himself for this hands-off management style, the troika. He gets into surgery. He gets up on an elbow, dramatically takes off the oxygen mask, says, I hope you're all Republicans. Puts on a mask, go back to sleep.
He actually took off the oxygen mask?
He was very dramatic. Takes it off. Now, the public here...
And you've heard this from the surgeons who were there.
Oh, yeah. No,
they described
everything is... this. People say, oh, this didn't happen. All that happened, I promise you.
He took off the mask and he leaned up and he said this to them?
Yes, very dramatic.
In the surgery?
Yes, right before being anesthetized, right before being put out. Now, the public hears he does this. And what's your reaction? If you're in the public and you hear the President of the United States has just been shot, we've just had a series of basically failed presidencies. Lyndon Johnson didn't seek a full second term. Nixon resigned under Watergate, 3 years out. Carter malaise. We turned to a former actor to save the country. He's been shot. The last 4 presidents who've been shot all died. He's cracking jokes in the hospital, basically in the face of death. We like that. American people like that, okay? I don't care what anyone says. It's true. We kind of admire that. He's tough. Right. That's who we want, And it built this bond with the American public that we got to see who he really was. In fact, the guy on the campaign trail really was Ronald Reagan. We liked that.
Right.
Well, what's interesting, and that helped him later on. It helped him separate the person from the politics. What I found interesting, where you were laughing about Mosh Mask, total side anecdote story. Reagan tested that line out 20 minutes earlier in the ER.
He rehearsed it?
He's lying in the ER, oxygen mask on, he sees Jerry Parr. And he had tried to do some jokes, and he says to Jerry, I hope they're all Republicans. Jerry Parr's the agent, looking down at him. And I hope they're all Republicans. And Jerry Parr looks down, And Jerry doesn't remember quite if he smiled or not, because frankly, Jerry Parr's going out of his mind, okay? This guy just got shot, and he's trying to protect him, and he's cracking a joke. And I wasn't sure Jerry was correct, frankly. Jerry Parr's memory on this day is fantastic. I never doubt it again. He has stuff that he got right in interviews that I later verified through reports that are 30 years old. I mean, fine. I'm like, Jerry, you're confused. He said it spontaneously in the OR later. No, he said it a couple times. He said that. Okay, fine. I'm interviewing a nurse. Did Reagan say anything? She's in the ER. Did Reagan say anything? She said, oh, yeah. He said, I hope they're all Republicans. I went, a technician said he said the same thing. I go, oh, my God. Reagan said the line, he put it in his back pocket and delivered it again. To me, that is new admiration for the guy, right? He's setting up the stage. Now, Ronald Reagan, I get into his filmography.
He had incredible presence of mind, obviously.
He did. Incredible presence of mind. Now, veteran of 53 movies, right? What were his 2 best movies? King's Row, Newt Rockne, All-American. What were his 2 best scenes in those 2 best movies? Hospital-like deathbed scenes.
Good point.
The guy's best scenes in all of film were these kinds of scenes. And so he knew, as Luke Cannon argues in his book, that this was a role for him to play. He was
George Gipp.
He was. Or Drake McHugh. Where's the rest of me? His best line. It's the title of his autobiography. After his legs get amputated, okay? He knows that's the time he has to deliver a good line. To reassure the public, to reassure those around him who must be nervous too. I mean, that takes a presence of mind.
Well, it was said of George Washington that he understood everything he was doing as president would set a precedent, and the country would look at it, and people would follow him, and it would have huge impact. Do you think that Reagan really had that same sort of sense of who the character of the president was, and he had a moral responsibility and a patriotic responsibility to do it right?
I think there's no question. There's no question he thought that. I think from the very beginning when he took the office, I mean, he always wore a suit coat in the office. He never took it off. I couldn't find anyone, except one weekend he went in, and I think he went in without a suit coat on. He never went to the Oval Office without a suit coat on. You know, I mean, and to him, I mean, maybe that's important, maybe it's not, maybe that means something, maybe it doesn't, but to him it meant something. That's why it's important. He really, you know, he kept the resolute desk in that office for a reason. You know, that's a historic desk. He believed it.
He liked the history that it evoked to him.
Yes, and that's important to him.
And he had a tremendous sense of that history.
He did, and everything he did. He never wanted to diminish the office. Remember, we just gone through Carter, who, whether you like him or not, did kind of diminish the office in the sense of pomp and circumstance. You know, I think he set the thermostat up higher. He let it kind of get run down. I'm not a Carter historian. But Reagan came in and said, no, you know, this office is important. It means something to the American people in this way, different than what Carter thought.
Well, Del, let me ask you. You've written a tremendous book, an amazing narrative. But let me ask you this: to step back, and where do you sense Reagan stands in the history of our country in terms of presidents? Having done this research, seen what this man was really like, pulled back the veil and shown people this inside vision of this guy, where do you think he stands in the history of our country?
I think Reagan will be viewed by historians as one of probably the more successful U.S. presidents over time in terms of getting his agenda through and his goals accomplished. Whether they were accomplished after he left or not, you know, the Cold War, the military buildup, you know, our entire debate over taxes in this country is completely different now thanks to Ronald Reagan. You know, if we had a debate with the Republican presidential contenders, you would have to say, okay, who's your favorite president, but you can't say Ronald Reagan, okay? And maybe some Democrats, too, you'd have to say you can't say Ronald Reagan. He's become this kind of iconic figure.
And you even had President Obama saying he's a transformational president.
He did. You know, Obama read Luke Cannon's book on vacation about Reagan because he knows that Reagan, you know, frankly, you know, I'd like to say that this day in particular recalibrated Reagan's entire presidency because we got to see who he was, separated the person from the politics, poll numbers went up, we liked who he was. Later in time when he got in trouble, you know, with Iran-Contra and other things, it didn't devastate his presidency because people said, you know what, you wouldn't believe the number of people who come to me at readings who are Democrats and say, I hated the guy's policies, but I kind of liked him as a person. You know, and that helps you as a politician. You know, when all politicians...
It helped give him the leverage to get that agenda through that you talked about. It made him one of the most successful.
And yes, and helped him survive scandals later too. And, you know, that's really important. Now, you know, I think that, you know, that's correct.
And you believe in the long run of history, people will remember this president of the United States who showed this character that Ronald Reagan showed on March 30th, 1981, when they wheeled him into a surgery.
I definitely think so. I think there's no question. I think C-SPAN does like an annual or biannual, whatever, ranking of presidents, and Reagan ranks really high. You know, and you know, you're going to have people on both sides of the debate. Some people, you know, think he was way too conservative and they don't like the guy. Other people on the other side hold him as this kind of iconic figure and don't see who he really is either. He's become kind of a myth in a way. Somewhere in the middle is the real Ronald Reagan. And that's still a fundamentally good, decent person who was a good leader and accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. If you just judge, people say to me, you're a Washington Post guy, Del, you know, and you're writing about Ronald Reagan, you know, and I say, listen, you know, journalists, I think, get an unfair, you know, needle stuck in us for like being biased, right? I'm not biased. I approached this with wide open eyes. I knew nothing about it. I came to admire Ronald Reagan as a guy and as a leader. Do I agree with all of his policy positions? No, but who does with anybody? But I could judge him on his success, right? He was a huge success. You know, he left office with the highest approval rating of any president. Now he's looked at as having accomplished winning the Cold War, you know, reducing the threat of nuclear war, altering the face of basically the entire, you know, Europe, changing the debate about taxes in this country. It will never be the same again. He even helped save Social Security. And so, you know, he did do dumb stuff too, but, you know, I mean, at the same time, you know, this is a guy who fundamentally did a lot and succeeded and you know, accomplished a lot.
Del Quentin Wilber, author of Rawhide Down, The Near Assassination of Ronald Reagan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.